Hi, welcome back. I'm Lon Schiffbauer, and today we are going to talk about international strategies. So let's go ahead and pull up our PowerPoint. Now, in order to understand international business strategies, we first have to understand strategy itself. Strategy is yet another one of these words that we use frequently and we think we understand, but then when pressed for a definition, we might struggle a little bit. So let's make sure that we understand strategy. Now, to understand strategy, we also need to understand tactics. I know we're working through this backwards, but bear with me, there's a reason for it. Tactics are easy to understand. Tactics are the specific steps an organization takes to achieve its strategic objectives. So, tactics are specific, deliberate steps that we take in order to achieve far reaching goals. Okay, so we can understand that. Not a big deal. All right. So then what's a strategy? All right. Well, a strategy is a course of action set by an organization, one which reflects and leverages an organization's core competencies and position in the industry. Core competencies and position in the industry. Remember those. To achieve a desired future state, the strategic objective. It is the chosen path of an organization by which it strives to achieve the desired future state. So, this means that a strategy requires an organization, coming up with a strategy, requires an organization to kind of determine what is the future state it wants to achieve. And given its core competencies and position in the marketplace, how can it best reach this future state? Now, there's any number of ways that an organization can reach a future state, but if you look at core competencies and position in the marketplace, that will tell an organization the best overall general course of action to take. Now, let's talk about core competencies, and then I'll give you an example. Core competency is a capability possessed by a company that cannot be easily matched by a competitor and gives it a competitive advantage. So, core competency is something that, hey, you do that really well. And in fact, it's not easy for a competitor to do that. You really ought to leverage that going forward, right? And then if we think about your position in the marketplace, that will point you in the right direction for a strategy. Now, let me give you an example of how I use this philosophy in these videos and so forth that I make. So I want to help provide educational material to lecturers and professors and teachers wherever around the world. Okay, so what is my position in the marketplace? Well, I'm just a schmuck, man. I'm just some dude in a studio, right? And so my position in the marketplace is I have no funding. I have no corporation behind me. I have no researchers backing me up. I have no nothing. Okay, so my position in the marketplace is really weak, right? Furthermore, I personally, my value is open and free access to information, kind of the open educational resources model, OER. I want free and unfettered access to information for students no matter where they may be. Okay, what are my core competencies? Well, you know what? I know how to work a camera and I can do PowerPoint presentations and I can pull this off fairly well. It's not a competitive advantage. Other people can do it as well, but still, it's something I'm good at. Okay, so what's my strategy? Well, should I build a ecosystem platform which I can then sell to institutions and students then have to pay a fee to access that ecosystem for the semester? No, That's not my core competency. That does not align with what I want to do. Free and unfettered open access, right? Should I write textbooks and sell them? No, no. Remember, free open access, students around the world. No, I'm not going to sell textbooks for $120. I'm not going to do that, right? Can I make videos and podcasts and make them available for all intents and purposes free? Yes, I can do that. So that is my strategy, to create a suite of services or services, products, videos, podcasts, articles online, so on and so forth, that anybody can access free of charge. It's all theirs. So that is my strategy. And my tactics are to make these things, right? Okay, so that's strategy and that's tactic. How are you going to succeed is the strategy. So there's all kinds of strategies, right? And remember, it's not like you look at a menu of strategies and say, oh, I like the way that one sounds. No, no, no. You look at what your position in the marketplace is, what your core competencies are, your values, right? And then you choose which strategy best fits those parameters. So let's look at a few different strategies. The first thing I want to do is I want to look at what are called generic strategies. I'm going to show you one in particular, and I'm going to go ahead and get out of the way here. This is a classic generic strategy, and it really looks at two different vectors, right? It looks at market appeal. To whom are you trying to appeal with your product or service? And then are you going for low cost or are you going for differentiation? We're different. We're unique, right? So is your market very narrow? You're only appealing to a small niche, or is your market very broad? All right. So narrow, broad, low cost, or differentiation. Now, let me show you an example. Let's take water, for example. Everybody needs water. Okay. Well, let's first look at tap water, just coming out of your standard tap. This is an example of overall cost. The market is very, very, very broad. Odds are you have access to tap water in your home, and it's super low cost. In fact, I challenge you to tell me how much a gallon of water costs from the tap. It's so inexpensive that you don't really pay that much attention to it. So that's an example of overall cost. However, we also have overall differentiation. This is once again where we're going for a very broad market, but we want to differentiate ourselves just a little bit. In this case, this is what bottled water goes for, kind of your standard bottled water. Nothing too fancy, nothing very special, nothing too expensive. It's more expensive than tap water, that's for darn sure, but it's not crazy, right? So people, a broad audience, a broad market can afford your product very, very easily. But then let's say that we're looking at more of a narrow market, all right? This is more of a cost focus. So take, for example, the French water Perrier, right? Perrier is more of a narrow market, all right? Not everybody drinks Perrier, but it's available to those who really like it, narrow market. However, it's fairly affordable, right? You know, in terms of something that would go to a narrow market, it's not like it's outrageously priced. However, if you want to go for differentiation focus to a narrow market and price is no, obstacle, then Holstein out of Austria. Now that's a water you might take a look at. It's like $100 for one of these things or something, and $80. I don't know. It's really, really expensive. Okay. So strategy. These are all the same product. And I don't know, Perrier is carbonated, so I guess that is slightly different, right? But they're all the same product. They're all water. And yet, the strategy that these companies take to sell the product is very, very, very different. Okay. So that shows the power of selecting the right strategy. The product does not decide the strategy. These are all the same product. It is you and your market and your position in the marketplace and your core competencies that decide the strategy. Okay. So that's a generic strategy. Now, let's now look at 3 value discipline strategies, most common value discipline strategies. Now, one of them is called operational excellence. And operational excellence basically means your strategy is to really dial in efficiency. We are talking Six Sigma lean to the umpteenth degree, just creating the most efficient process you possibly can. So operational is process, excellent meaning you kick butt, right? So a great example of operational excellence is the Japanese company Toyota, car manufacturer. They are pretty much the poster child of operational excellence. When it comes to efficiency and their processes, they're second to none. Okay. So if your core competencies and your values and your position in the marketplace allow you, operational excellence is a great value discipline strategy. Another one is product or innovation leadership. This is one where it is a focus on providing state-of-the-art products and services. Okay, meaning your stuff is just really cool, cutting edge functionality coming out of your wazoo. We're talking about really top end, cutting edge, state of the art tech and services. Now, examples of this are Apple of the old days. That's why I have the old logo. Apple these days is really more about incremental innovation, incremental innovation. We talked about that in a previous video. I'll see if I can remember to put a link to it up above. When it comes to innovation, they're not about radical innovation anymore. Now it's pretty much incremental. But in the old days, they were like 5 years ahead of anybody else. Okay. The German company BMW, auto manufacturer, they are about product leadership. While a Toyota is a fantastic car, I own a Toyota. A BMW is just, years ahead in terms of product leadership. Okay. Now, a third one is customer intimacy. This is a focus on delivering tailored products and services based on customer knowledge. All right. Meaning you shop here, you purchase here because they know you. They know what you need and want better than you know what you need and want. And they really get to know you, and you are part of the family. Now, here are a couple of companies that practice customer intimacy in different ways. You take Amazon, for example. Because of Amazon's algorithms and their data, big data, all this sort of stuff and so forth, they really, really know you. They know you very well. And so quite often when you look at suggestions from Amazon, hey, people who have purchased this have also looked at this, and people who have enjoyed this book have enjoyed this book. And speaking for myself, quite often when I look at the books that they recommend, I'm kind of like, yeah, actually, I've kind of looked at that one. I've thought about that. Or when they look at products saying, hey, you purchase these products, you might be interested in those. I'm like, you know what? You're right. Now, this is customer intimacy, but more at a kind of artificial intelligence level, because it's all about algorithms and so forth. Nordstrom made a reputation for themselves as customer intimacy in the apparel industry just because their salespeople really sit down and get to know you, get to know what you do, how you're going to use whatever you purchase, where you're going to use it, how you express yourself through your clothing and so forth. And so when they make recommendations to you, then they're pretty spot on. My wife and I one time went to Nordstrom to buy her some boots, and she said, "I'm interested in these boots." And they said, "That's great. I'll bring you out a pair, but let's talk." And they really got to know her and how she'd use the boots and so forth. And then they came out with 5 other pairs of boots that she had not said, "Hey, I want to look at these." And one of those were like the most perfect boots on earth. They are her favorite boots far and away. And so they really kind of got to know her and what she wanted her boots for. That's customer intimacy. Okay. There are also what we call grand strategies. I'm only going to show you a few of the grand strategies, but they'll give you a sense anyway of how different companies use different strategies based on their competencies, their values, and their position in the marketplace. Okay, so two is either market share or market development. Okay, what's the difference? Well, market share says, hey, you're in an industry where there's a bunch of competitors and everybody already has one of the products. All right. So take a cell phone, for example. You have a cell phone. I have a cell phone, smartphone, whatever you call digital devices. I don't even know what you call them anymore because we don't use them as phones. Everybody's got one. Everyone's got one. Everyone's got one. And everybody has a plan, right? Mine's with, I don't know, is it T-Mobile? I guess. I don't know. Everybody has a plan. So how are you going to compete? You want to get a larger piece of the market, a larger share of the market, which means you've got to compete on price. You got to lower your prices. You need to compete on features. You need to compete on customer service, things like that. You need to steal customers from your competitors. So that is a market share strategy. Remember, depending on your core competency and your position in the marketplace and so forth, it will direct you to this. On the other hand, market development is when not everybody has one. Say like a 3D printer. I don't have a 3D printer. I may one day. My wife really enjoys making things. And so she's always talking about a 3D printer, but we don't have one yet. And I only know a very small handful of people who own a 3D printer. But that's because most of us don't know what we would do with the thing, right? Market development is all about convincing people who don't have your product and don't think they need your product, convincing them that you need their product, right? So market share, I have a cousin who just started working for a 3D printing company, and she's on the customer service side. And her whole strategy there is convincing people that they need one of these things. And she's focusing mostly in the craft market. So very fascinating. Those are market development, market share. Another strategy would be a strategic alliance. A strategic alliance is when two companies get together to make something together because each company brings something to the party that the other company lacks, okay? So an example of a strategic alliance, for a couple of years, Subaru and Toyota, two Japanese auto manufacturers, got together to create Subaru's BRZ and Toyota's, well, at the time it was the F86 or something. I forget what the Toyota version is called now, but it's the same darn car. It's the same car. They both got together to create this one product, and then they put their separate badges on the car and sold them and so forth. If you can find a partner who's willing to bring their skills to the party and you can bring your skills and your competencies, then that way the two of you can bridge gaps and create a product that on your own you would not have been able to do quite as well. Okay. Now, another one is a joint venture, similar to a strategic alliance, but a little different. A strategic alliance is when two companies get together to create one product, but those two companies, they're always separate, right? A strategic alliance, a joint venture. A joint venture is when two companies get together and start a third separate company, okay? So I'll give you an example. General Motors is a U.S. auto manufacturer. And they wanted to do business in China because there's a lot of new, middle-class Chinese families coming up in the economy, and they want cars. They want cars, and there's a lot of them, and they've got their new middle-class money to burn. General Motors wanted to sell them cars. Well, General Motors, because of doing business in China, you're not allowed to just go in and set up shop. So what they did is they found another auto manufacturer, a Chinese auto manufacturer, SAIC. I don't know how that's pronounced exactly. Just SAIC, S-A-I-C. And together, the two of them created a third company, SGMW, right? So it was SAIC, General Motors, Wuling, where they're based. And I know I mispronounced that. I apologize. I really should learn how to pronounce that. So this is a third company altogether, right? It is not General Motors. It is not SAIC. It is a third separate company that really leverages the expertise and resources of these other two. Okay, so that is a joint venture, another strategy for getting into a market. Of course, there's mergers and acquisitions. You know about these. A merger is when two companies get together and become one company, or an acquisition is when one company buys another company and brings it into the fold. Mergers and acquisitions can be a great strategy for gaining market power, entering a market very quickly, right? Acquiring knowledge and avoiding costs of new product development. These are all reasons why a company may choose to go with a merger or acquisition strategy. For example, online companies like Google in the US, which is now ABC, right, the larger company, Amazon US, or Alibaba in China. These online companies, the way they grow so stinking fast is through acquisition. That is the bread and butter of these online companies as they grow. They just acquire and acquire and acquire to gain market value, enter a market quickly, acquire knowledge, and not have to worry about product development. They can just buy the expertise, right? So Alibaba often in China, Amazon in the US, these are online companies that use acquisition to their advantage. Okay. So those are general strategies, right? And by the way, it's not like you just choose one strategy. Many strategies are a mix and blend of different strategies to kind of get you to where you're going. So when we look at now the international strategies, we're not saying, okay, forget all those. Now choose one of these four. No. It's all a blend and mix, all dependent on your core competencies, values, and position in the marketplace. Okay, so when we look at international strategies, I'm going to introduce you to four strategies, all right? Global, standardization, localization, transnational, international. And to do this, I'm going to go ahead and get out of the way and just kind of introduce you to them, and then we will go into depth with each one. We're looking at two vectors. It's kind of a, this is incredibly similar to the generic strategy that we talked about with water as an example. So, pressures for cost reduction. In other words, can you charge a lot, or does the market, want you to reduce prices? So if there are low pressures for cost reduction, that means you can charge more. If there are high pressures for cost reduction, that means you need to charge less, okay? And then pressure for local responsiveness. In other words, can you just sell the same thing in any country and you can sell it just fine because there's low need to customize it for the country? Or is there a high need to customize the product for each individual country? These are the vectors that we're going to look at. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and explore each one of these, right? Let's first look at where there is a high need to reduce cost, right? So you're not allowed to charge a lot, but there's really low pressure to localize, right? That's the global standardization strategy. Standard across the globe, because you don't have to, you have to keep things cheap, but you don't have to localize. So increasing profitability and growth through pursuing low-cost strategies. That would probably be like operational excellence, right? That's a low-cost strategy. On a global scale, reducing costs by creating economies of scale. That's definitely part of operational excellence. Local economies and learning effects, okay? All right, makes sense. Makes the most sense when there are strong pressures for cost reduction and the demand for local responsiveness is low. So, for example, see this? This is a cap. It's a cap to that camera. Okay, cap to that camera. I'm not going to pay a lot of money for this cap. It better be pretty darn close to free. So, high pressure to reduce costs. But it's a standard cap. It doesn't matter where I'm selling this darn thing, right? It's standard. So if all I do is make these caps, oh yeah, I'm totally going for a global standardization strategy. Okay. Well, now let's look though at localization strategy. This is exactly opposite. We have low pressures for cost reduction, which means we can charge a lot. But we have really high pressure to localize. We need to make the thing different no matter where we are. Okay, so increasing profitability by customizing products to meet the specific taste and preferences of the local market. Makes most sense when pressures for cost reduction are low. So prices can be higher. I know it's confusing, but bear with me. And local responsiveness is high, becomes less viable as competitors emerge. So if there are not a lot of competitors out there, I can do this one because while I do need to localize my product everywhere I go, I can charge a lot for it. Okay, so for example, if I am making let's say I write a book that is the world's foremost only book about something that everybody is interested in. Well, now I need to translate it and interpret it in every single market, wherever different languages are spoken. And understand, translating isn't just about Google Translate and you change the words. There's interpretation, how things are stated, so on and so forth. This is expensive. This takes a lot. On the other hand, if everybody wants this book, I can charge a lot for it. But if other people start to write books and there are more and more competitors, then it becomes less and less cost effective for me because I can't charge whatever I want. Okay. Next, we have transnational strategy. Right up here, pressures for cost reduction are high, so you can't charge whatever you want. You got to keep prices low. And you know what? Pressure for customization, localization is high. This one is tough. You got to localize your product, but you can't charge a lot either. This is tough. Attempt to simultaneously lower costs through local location economies, economies of scale, learning effects, while also differentiating product offered to meet regional need and preferences, but also foster multinational flow of skills between subsidiaries. Okay, what does that mean? Well, let's take the U.S. company McDonald's for a moment, because McDonald's is in like 188 countries, I think it is. 189. I forget the exact number. There are a lot of McDonald's in the world. But you can't just charge whatever you want at McDonald's. McDonald's really wants to keep prices low, but you can't sell the same thing in all of these McDonald's. So McDonald's needs to make sure that their menu is really, really tailored to the local tastes of the market. So I've traveled all around the world, and I have been in a McDonald's in probably 5 or 6, 7 countries. And yes, the menu is completely different and the tastes are completely different, but the cost is always low. So that is a transnational strategy. All right, last one. International strategy. This is when pressures for cost reduction are low, so you can charge a fairly high amount. And requirement to localize, to customize, is pretty low. Oh, all right, this is pretty nice. Selling products developed in one market and selling them internationally with minimal customization, meaning a universal need with few competitors, becomes less viable as competitors increase. So let me give you an example. My phone here is a Samsung. So this is a Samsung Galaxy, whatever, Note 10. And this is made in South Korea. Samsung is a South Korean company. Well, Samsung sells these things. Boy, say that 10 times fast. Samsung sells these things all around the world, And with the exception of some software and some operating system tweaks and so forth, they're essentially selling the very same product all around the world. This Samsung 10 is more or less the same as one in South Korea, in Japan, in Costa Rica, in Saudi Arabia. It's the same darn phone. So they don't need to localize it. They don't need to customize it that much. Furthermore, they can actually charge quite a bit, because these are unique phones. They have the stylus and they have some other capabilities and so forth, and people really want them. So they can charge a fair amount. However, when more competitors come onto the market, yeah, then there are some pressures to reduce the cost. Okay? So, folks, that's strategy for you. Okay? You just went through a whirlwind tour of all kinds of strategies, both high level as well as international. So I hope this was helpful. Stick around. We have a whole lot more coming your way. And until we talk again, have a fantastic day.